Hi Aries, welcome back, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for being here and spending a little bit of your time with me today. This is going to be a general reading, so not every message will resonate with everyone, and that's perfectly okay. Take what feels right for your journey and leave behind what doesn't. As I was shuffling your cards, I kept feeling this very strong message repeating itself. Don't send that text just yet. I know that's probably not what some of you want to hear, because there is someone here that you've been thinking about quite a lot. But the energy surrounding this connection feels incredibly active, even if nothing seems to be happening on the outside. Something is shifting, someone is noticing, and the silence between you may be speaking much louder than any message ever could. So Aries, let's get into your reading. Okay, so Aries, the moment I started laying these cards down, I kept getting the feeling that someone is waiting for you to break first. Not because they don't care, not because they've forgotten, but because somewhere along the way, this connection settled into a pattern where you were often the one carrying the emotional momentum. You were the one reaching out. You were the one trying to understand. You were the one willing to move toward the silence instead of away from it. And here's the thing, that energy feels different now. Something about you has shifted. Maybe you haven't fully noticed it yet, but this person has. The distance between you doesn't feel the same anymore. The silence doesn't feel the same anymore. It's almost as if the space around this connection has become louder. And as I look at the High Priestess sitting here, I keep feeling this calm, steady presence around you. Not passive, not defeated, just still. For some of you, there may have been moments recently where you picked up your phone, stared at the screen, started typing something, and then erased it. Maybe there was a message sitting in your drafts. Maybe there was a conversation playing over and over inside your head. You wanted clarity. You wanted movement. You wanted to know where you stand. But every time you got close to reaching out, something inside you hesitated. And honestly, I don't think that hesitation was fear. I think it was intuition. Because the energy around this connection doesn't feel finished. It feels quiet. There's a difference. A very important difference. And while you're sitting here trying to make sense of the silence, somebody else is sitting in that silence too. Only they're experiencing it very differently. Because for the first time in a long time, they can actually feel the absence of your energy. You know, when someone becomes a constant part of your emotional world, you start assuming they'll always be there. You assume they'll always answer. You assume they'll always understand. You assume they'll always care. And this person may have become comfortable with that assumption. But something changed. The moment you stopped pushing, the moment you stopped chasing answers, the moment you stopped trying to carry the entire connection on your shoulders, something shifted. And as I glance over at strength, it almost feels like this quiet power is surprising even you. Because Aries energy is usually associated with movement, action, momentum, doing something, fixing something, saying something. But this feels different. This feels like somebody learning that not every battle requires a charge forward. Not every answer comes from another conversation. Not every door opens because you knock harder. Sometimes strength looks like staying exactly where you are. Sometimes strength looks like allowing another person to sit with their own emotions. And honestly, I think that's what's happening here. Because whoever this person is, they seem to be noticing things they couldn't see before. The moments they took for granted. The comfort they rarely acknowledged. The way you showed up for them. The way your energy lingered long after conversations ended. It's almost like they're looking around and realizing something important is missing. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just little moments, small realizations, tiny emotional echoes throughout their day. And those moments are starting to add up. The Four of Swords feels incredibly present here. Everything feels slower, quieter, less reactive. You may have expected immediate movement, immediate answers, immediate signs. Instead, it feels like both of you are sitting inside a pause that nobody planned, a pause that nobody necessarily wanted. But somehow this pause is revealing things neither of you could see while everything was moving. Because when life becomes quiet, truth tends to become louder. And that's exactly what I keep feeling. Truth becoming louder. Not spoken truth, not text message truth, not conversation truth, inner truth. The kind people hear when they can no longer distract themselves. The kind that shows up late at night. The kind that appears when the phone isn't ringing, when nobody is demanding anything, when there is finally enough space to feel. And wow, as the moon appears here, the energy becomes even more emotional. Because I don't think everything is visible yet. There are feelings beneath feelings, thoughts beneath thoughts, things this person hasn't admitted, things they haven't fully understood, things they may not even have words for yet. Part of them seems to be wandering through their own emotional landscape, trying to understand why this silence feels so different, why your absence feels so noticeable, why certain memories keep resurfacing, why certain songs suddenly mean something, why certain places remind them of you. And they may not have all those answers, not yet, but they're asking questions they weren't asking before, and that matters. Because the energy here isn't showing someone who has completely disconnected. It's showing someone becoming aware, slowly, quietly, one realization at a time. Meanwhile, Aries, your role in this feels surprisingly simple. Not easy, but simple. Keep listening to yourself. Keep honoring what your intuition has been trying to tell you. Because every time I look back at the High Priestess, I feel that same message repeating itself. You don't need to force anything. You don't need to chase clarity. You don't need to convince anyone of your value. Something important is already unfolding beneath the surface. And the deeper I move into this energy, the more it feels like somebody is beginning to understand what your silence is actually saying. Even if they haven't found the courage to respond to it yet, something keeps pulling their attention back in your direction. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way they can easily explain to other people. It's happening in quiet moments, the kind of moments nobody else sees. And honestly, Aries, that's what makes this energy feel so powerful. Because the memories aren't showing up when they're trying to think about you. They're showing up when they're trying not to. I keep seeing somebody going through their day, doing all the normal things they're supposed to be doing, staying busy, staying distracted, staying focused on responsibilities. And somehow your name slips into their thoughts. A memory appears out of nowhere. A conversation they haven't thought about in months suddenly replays in perfect detail. A smile, a look, a joke. A moment that seemed completely ordinary at the time. And that's where the Six of Cups begins to make itself known. Because this isn't just nostalgia. It's recognition. They're revisiting pieces of this connection they once overlooked. The little things. The things that didn't seem important back then. The way you listened. The way you understood them without needing lengthy explanations. The way your presence somehow made difficult days feel lighter. You know what's interesting? When people are living inside an experience, they don't always realize how meaningful it is. Sometimes they only understand its value after enough time has passed, after enough distance has settled in, after enough silence creates room for reflection. And that's exactly what feels like it's happening here. This person keeps returning to moments they once considered normal, only they don't look normal anymore. They look precious. They look rare. They look like something they didn't fully appreciate while it was right in front of them. I keep hearing someone saying to themselves, why didn't I pay more attention? Not necessarily with regret yet, more like confusion. Like they're trying to understand how something so significant managed to hide inside something so familiar. Because Aries, I don't think they expected your absence to affect them this deeply. They may have believed they could simply move forward. Focus elsewhere. Stay occupied. Convince themselves everything was fine. But every path they take somehow circles back to the same place, back to the same person, back to the same connection, back to you. And wow, as judgment appears, the energy becomes very reflective, not emotional in a chaotic way, not desperate, just deeply aware, almost like somebody is standing in front of a mirror they avoided for a very long time. And the reflection staring back at them is showing them things they can no longer ignore. They're beginning to see their role in what happened. They're beginning to recognize moments where they misunderstood you. Moments where they dismissed things that actually mattered. Moments where they assumed there would always be more time, more opportunities, more conversations, more chances to figure things out. And life has a strange way of teaching people the value of something once it no longer feels guaranteed. That's what keeps coming through. Awareness. Awareness growing little by little. Because the more they revisit the story of this connection, the harder it becomes to paint you as someone ordinary. The harder it becomes to convince themselves that what existed between you was replaceable. And honestly, that realization seems to be catching them off guard. The Five of Cups enters the reading so quietly that it almost sneaks in. Not as punishment, not as heartbreak, more as a realization of what wasn't fully understood at the time. I keep feeling somebody replaying old decisions in their head, wondering how things might have looked if they had approached them differently. Wondering what they missed because they were too focused on something else. Maybe they were distracted by fear. Maybe pride got involved. Maybe timing felt complicated. Maybe they were dealing with things they never talked about. Whatever the reason, they're starting to recognize that some of the things they once focused on seem much smaller now. And some of the things they ignored seem much larger. You know, perspective is a strange thing. Distance changes it. Time changes it. Silence changes it. And this person's perspective is changing. The pieces are rearranging themselves. The stories they once told themselves about this connection doesn't seem to fit anymore. Something about it feels incomplete. Something about it feels unfinished. Something about it keeps asking for another look. The hermit feels very present here. Not because this person wants to isolate forever. Not because they're running away, but because they're searching. They're trying to understand themselves before they understand anything else. They're asking questions they never asked before. They're examining emotions they previously brushed aside. They're sitting with thoughts that once felt uncomfortable. And Aries, one thing keeps standing out. The more they search, the more often your energy appears. Not because they're forcing it. Not because they're intentionally trying to hold on. It simply keeps showing up, like a familiar light appearing at the end of a long hallway. Like a song they forgot they loved. Like a place that suddenly feels important after years of being ignored. And the deeper they go into this process, the harder it becomes to pretend they feel nothing. Because the truth is beginning to take up more space than the excuses ever did. The memories are becoming clearer. The emotions are becoming harder to dismiss. The significance of what you brought into their life is becoming more difficult to overlook. And as this energy continues unfolding, I can't help but feel that they're reaching a point where remembering is no longer the hardest part. Understanding what those memories actually mean to them, that's where everything begins to change. Because once somebody realizes that a connection mattered more than they originally believed, they eventually arrive at a crossroads. They can keep pretending, or they can face what they've been avoiding. And honestly, Aries, this feels like someone standing at that exact crossroads. The strange thing is, I don't think they're fighting you. I don't even think they're fighting the connection anymore. The battle feels much more personal than that. It feels like they're fighting themselves. They're fighting the version of themselves that always needed certainty. The version that needed control. The version that felt safer keeping emotions locked behind walls rather than allowing them to breathe. And wow, the moment death enters this reading, the atmosphere changes. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It feels more like walking through a familiar house and realizing it doesn't feel the same anymore. The furniture is still there. The walls are still standing, but something fundamental has shifted. Something old is quietly losing its grip. This person seems to be recognizing that the strategies they've used their entire life are no longer working. Avoidance isn't working. Distraction isn't working. Logic isn't working. Running isn't working. Because no matter what direction they turn, the feelings remain. And that's deeply uncomfortable for someone who likes having answers. I keep feeling this energy of somebody who spent years believing emotions should be managed, organized, controlled, contained. But love rarely follows those rules. Connection rarely follows those rules. And the more they try to place this situation into a neat little box, the more it spills out into every corner of their life. You know, some people are afraid of losing another person. Other people are afraid of what happens when they stop protecting themselves. This feels much closer to the second one. Because underneath all of this, I keep sensing someone who learned a long time ago that vulnerability came with consequences. Maybe disappointment, maybe rejection, maybe betrayal, maybe abandonment. Whatever it was, those experiences built walls, and those walls probably served a purpose at one point. They probably helped this person survive difficult chapters of their life. But those same walls are becoming impossible to maintain, because what worked in the past isn't fitting the present anymore, and that's where the hanged man starts appearing. Not as confusion, not as delay, more like surrender happening one tiny piece at a time. I keep seeing someone pause in the middle of their own thoughts, pause in the middle of their own arguments, pause in the middle of all the reasons they've been giving themselves, and suddenly, they're looking at everything from a completely different angle. The story they've been telling themselves begins to crack. The assumptions begin to crack, the defenses begin to crack, and what appears underneath those cracks feels surprisingly human. Fear, simple fear. Not fear of you, fear of feeling this much, fear of caring this much, fear of needing someone this much, because here's what keeps coming through. This person may have been perfectly comfortable when the connection existed in theory, when feelings stayed manageable, when everything remained within their comfort zone. But the deeper this connection became, the more vulnerable they felt. And vulnerability was never their favorite place to be. Honestly, it may have terrified them. The Nine of Swords feels incredibly heavy here. Not because they're falling apart, not because they're incapable of handling life, but because their mind has become a crowded place, a very crowded place. I keep seeing someone trying to sleep while their thoughts continue moving, trying to focus while their attention drifts, trying to convince themselves They're fine while something deeper keeps asking for acknowledgement. Questions repeat themselves. Conversations replay themselves. Moments revisit them unexpectedly. And the hardest part, they don't seem able to solve this the way they solve everything else. There isn't a checklist for this. There isn't a strategy for this. There isn't a shortcut through this. They're being asked to feel it. And that's what makes it so challenging. Because feelings require patience. They require honesty. They require somebody to sit still long enough to hear what their heart is actually saying. And for a while, I don't think this person wanted to hear it. But something is softening. Something is changing. Temperance arrives almost like a deep breath after a long period of tension. Not because everything is fixed. Not because all the answers have arrived. It feels more like somebody finally lowering their guard. A little. Just enough. Just enough to stop fighting every emotion the moment it appears. Just enough to stop judging themselves for caring. Just enough to stop treating love like an opponent that needs to be defeated. And Aries, I have to tell you, the energy around this transformation feels very quiet, which is why it might be easy to miss. There are no grand speeches here. No dramatic declarations. No sudden explosions of emotion. What I see instead is somebody slowly becoming more honest with themselves. Somebody slowly admitting things they once denied. Somebody slowly recognizing that strength doesn't always come from resistance. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. And the deeper they move into that acceptance, the more they begin to understand that what they feel for you isn't disappearing simply because they want it to. It isn't fading simply because it's inconvenient. It isn't changing simply because it challenges their comfort zone. Something inside them is evolving. The old version that relied on distance and control is becoming harder to hold on to. And as that process continues, they're finding themselves standing face to face with a truth they've spent a very long time trying not to name. A truth that becomes harder to avoid every single time they imagine life continuing exactly as it is. Because something interesting happens when a person finally stops running from their feelings. The question is no longer, what do I feel? The question becomes, what am I going to do about it? And honestly, Aries, that's where the energy starts becoming very different. Much more active, much more intentional, not rushed, not impulsive, just focused. Because this person seems to be realizing that staying frozen carries its own consequences. Every day that passes without movement creates another day of uncertainty, another day of wondering, another day of replaying scenarios in their head instead of creating new ones. And for somebody who has spent so much time thinking, reflecting, questioning, and examining themselves, that realization feels significant. The King of Wands steps into the reading with a very distinct presence. I don't see someone acting out of panic. I don't see somebody making emotional decisions simply because they're overwhelmed. What I see is somebody beginning to reconnect with their confidence. Not the confidence that comes from ego, the confidence that comes from clarity, the confidence that comes from finally understanding what matters. Because there was a period where this person seemed disconnected from their own direction. One part of them wanted to move closer. Another part wanted to protect themselves. One part wanted honesty. Another part wanted distance. That internal conflict kept pulling them in opposite directions. But the energy feels different now, less divided, more aligned. I keep seeing someone sitting quietly with their thoughts and arriving at the same conclusion over and over again. No matter how they examine the situation, no matter which angle they approach it from, no matter how many alternatives they imagine, their attention keeps returning to you, and that's creating a level of determination that wasn't there before. You know, there comes a point where thinking no longer feels productive. There comes a point where reflection has done everything it can do. And after that point, people begin looking toward action. Carefully, slowly, but intentionally. That's why the Knight of Cups feels so important here. Because this energy isn't aggressive. It isn't forceful. It isn't someone barging into your life demanding immediate answers. It's much softer than that. Much more vulnerable than that. I keep feeling someone rehearsing conversations in their mind. Not because they want the perfect words. Because they want the right words. There's a difference. The perfect words don't exist. The right words come from honesty. And I think they're beginning to understand that. They're considering what they would say, if given the opportunity. What deserves acknowledgement? What deserves an apology? What deserves recognition? Because the deeper they go into this self-reflection, the harder it becomes to pretend that nothing happened. The harder it becomes to pretend that this connection wasn't meaningful. And wow, there's something incredibly human about that. Because I don't see a person trying to impress you. I see someone trying to understand how to approach you in a way that reflects who they're becoming rather than who they used to be. That's a very different energy. The Eight of Wands appears almost like a current moving beneath still water. At first glance, everything may look calm, everything may look unchanged, everything may look quiet, but underneath, movement. Lots of movement. Thoughts connecting. Decisions forming. Emotions organizing themselves into something clearer. It's almost like a series of internal green lights beginning to appear. Not all at once, one at a time. Small realizations leading to larger realizations. Small decisions leading toward larger decisions. And Aries, I have to say, one thing keeps standing out. This person doesn't seem interested in repeating old patterns. They're actually thinking about them, analyzing them, questioning them, because they know exactly where those patterns led before. They know what happened when fear made decisions. They know what happened when avoidance took the driver's seat. And there seems to be a genuine desire to approach things differently. Not perfectly, just differently. That's a very important distinction. The Emperor carries a fascinating energy here, especially because we're talking about Aries. This card feels less like authority and more like accountability. I keep feeling somebody asking themselves difficult questions, questions they once avoided, questions that require maturity, questions that require ownership. What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of relationship am I capable of creating? What actions actually match what I feel? Those questions seem to matter more than they used to, because this person understands something they didn't fully understand before. Feelings alone don't build anything. Intentions alone don't build anything. At some point, emotions need structure. At some point, understanding needs action. At some point, somebody has to step forward and show that they've learned something from the journey. And honestly, that realization feels bigger than any single conversation, because it's changing how they view themselves. The version of this person that once waited for life to make decisions for them feels like it's fading further into the background. The version emerging now appears more willing to take responsibility for their choices, more willing to face uncertainty, more willing to risk vulnerability. Not because vulnerability suddenly feels comfortable, because avoiding it no longer feels comfortable either. And that's a very different place to stand. I keep seeing someone looking toward the future and realizing they don't want to carry the same answered questions forever. They don't want to spend years wondering what might have happened if they had been more honest, more open, more courageous. The possibility of regret seems heavier to them than it once did, which is why the energy continues building, slowly, quietly, steadily, like somebody gathering the courage they've been searching for all along. And the closer they get to that courage, the more one particular thought keeps returning to the center of everything. No matter how many people they've met, no matter how many distractions they've surrounded themselves with, no matter how much time has passed, nobody feels quite the way you do. And honestly, Aries, that realization seems to be landing much deeper than they expected, because this isn't about comparison anymore. This isn't about looking for someone better. It isn't about exploring other possibilities. The energy feels far more personal than that. It's about recognition. It's about understanding that certain connections leave fingerprints on your soul. Not because they're perfect, not because they're easy, but because they change something inside of you. And wow, the Lovers appears here with such a quiet certainty, not loud, not dramatic, not demanding attention, just present. I keep feeling this energy of somebody sitting with themselves and finally allowing the truth to settle. Not the truth they wanted, not the truth that felt safest, the truth that remains after all the noise disappears. And what remains seems to be a growing awareness that what they experienced with you wasn't ordinary. There was something about the way you understood them, something about the way you challenged them, something about the way you saw through them, you know? Sometimes people spend so much time trying to protect themselves from a connection that they never stop to ask why the connection affected them so deeply in the first place. That's what feels different now. The resistance is weakening. The curiosity is growing. And the more curious they become, the more honest they're forced to be. Because every honest answer seems to lead back to the same place. Back to your energy. Back to your presence. Back to the impact you've had on their life. The Ace of Swords arrives almost like a window opening inside a room that has been closed for too long. Fresh air, clarity, a different perspective. I don't see confusion surrounding this person the way I did before. There are still emotions to process. Still things to understand. Still fears they're working through. But underneath all of that, something is becoming surprisingly clear. They're no longer asking themselves whether you mattered. They're asking themselves what they want to do with that realization. And that's a very different question. Because once somebody accepts the significance of a connection, they can no longer hide behind uncertainty. They can no longer pretend they don't know how they feel. The conversation shifts. The internal dialogue shifts. And I keep hearing this energy of somebody wanting to be honest. Not because honesty is easy, because carrying everything unsaid has become exhausting. There may be things they wish they had expressed earlier, things they wish they had acknowledged sooner, moments they wish they had handled differently. And while I don't necessarily see them dwelling in guilt, I do see reflection, a lot of reflection. The kind that creates wisdom rather than shame. The kind that helps somebody understand who they want to become moving forward. Because this person seems far less interested in defending the past than they are in creating something different. The Seven of Pentacles feels beautiful here, not because it's fast, not because it's exciting, because it's intentional. I keep seeing someone who is beginning to think long-term, somebody who is no longer looking at this connection through the lens of temporary emotions, temporary fears, temporary circumstances. They're looking beyond the immediate moment, beyond the discomfort, beyond the uncertainty. They're asking themselves whether something meaningful deserves patience, whether something meaningful deserves effort, whether something meaningful deserves care. And honestly, the answer they're arriving at seems very different from the answer they would have given months ago, because growth changes people, experience changes people, self-awareness changes people. The person who once focused on escape seems much less interested in running. The person who once focused on self-protection seems more interested in building. And that's where the energy becomes surprisingly tender, because building requires trust. Not just trust in another person, trust in yourself. Trust that you're capable of showing up differently. Trust that you're capable of making better choices. Trust that you're capable of creating something healthier than what existed before. And Aries, I feel like this person is beginning to believe that about themselves. Not completely, not all at once, but more than they used to. The Ten of Pentacles settles into the reading with a warmth that feels almost unfamiliar after everything this connection has traveled through. It's not about fantasy. It's not about idealizing anyone. It's about vision, the ability to picture something lasting, the ability to imagine stability where there was once uncertainty, the ability to imagine partnership where there was once distance. And what strikes me most is that this energy doesn't feel driven by fear anymore. It doesn't feel driven by loneliness. It doesn't feel driven by panic. It feels driven by appreciation, by understanding, by recognizing value. Because once somebody realizes that something truly matters, they begin viewing it differently. They stop asking, what can I get from this? And start asking, what can I contribute to this? That's a profound shift, a very human shift. And somewhere inside this transformation, I keep sensing a desire to be known honestly, not through assumptions, not through misunderstandings, not through old versions of themselves, but through truth, real truth, the kind that requires vulnerability, the kind that requires humility, the kind that sometimes begins with words that are difficult to say. Words like I was wrong, words like I understand now, words like I didn't realize. Because underneath everything I've seen throughout this reading, there appears to be one emotion growing stronger than all the others. Not fear, not confusion, not hesitation. Just a quiet realization that some people enter your life and change the way you see love forever. And once the realization fully settles into the heart, it becomes very difficult to keep pretending otherwise. And Aries, as I sit with this energy one last time, I just keep feeling that not every meaningful shift begins with action. Sometimes it begins with stillness. Sometimes it begins with finally choosing yourself. Whatever is unfolding here, I hope you remember that your value has never depended on someone else's timing, someone else's fears, or someone else's ability to recognize what you bring into their life. You are already enough exactly as you are. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this space with me. If this reading resonated, feel free to leave a comment and let me know how it connected with your journey. I always love hearing from you. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay grounded, stay open, and keep trusting your inner wisdom. Sending you so much love. Bye, Aries.